Hi, this is Julie Hirschberg here from Reactive Physical Therapy. It is Friday, which means we made it through another week here in California, at least, Los Angeles, another week of living life differently with this virus happening. Here in the LA area, we have a couple of clinics and we have essentially very minimally seeing anybody in person at this point, but doing a whole lot of telemedicine visits. We're streaming all of our classes online and just trying to reach people that still need very much neurologic physical therapy, occupational therapy. And this is part of our mission is to help people recover movement and stay strong and confident even in crazy times like this. And I would say we're trying to reach out and do this even more. So we're hosting all 19 of our wellness classes actually right now, live streaming online, and they're even bigger classes than they ever were before. I think we hit 22 people in a class this week, and typically we'll have 6 to 10 people in person. So and it's just so exciting to me that we're able to help people stay active and moving even when they're not physically present. We're also doing about 100 telehealth or these e-visits every week, trying to stay in touch with people and just staying connected in the safest way that we can. And if possible. So it's definitely been an interesting time for us, as I know it has been for the world. I have particularly been thankful for new things coming out that I can read and learn from that is not the news. I have to just stay disconnected from some of the news. I'll read a couple of newspapers, but watching the news kind of drives me batty. So just this week, actually, this wonderful article came out that was a really nice review of functional neurologic disorders. And here at Reactive, we are preparing for our mini course, which is a functional movement disorders update, and that's going to be on April 9th. And this paper couldn't have come out at a better time, really, to be honest. And so what I decided today as we're preparing for this course, and I've been doing a lot of reading and researching and putting together some cases, I thought we would review this paper together. And you probably already know this about me, but I'm pretty crazy about the brain. I even wore my reactive brain today. I was helping one of our therapists set up for class, and I just thought I'm gonna wear all my reactive gear, so put it all on this morning. I even painted my nails reactive colors. I'm very proud of our company. If you didn't know that, our whole team has just been amazing in this crazy time. So I'm very proud of what we do. Very crazy about the brain, and very crazy, crazy as in passionate crazy about functional disorders, and functional neurologic disorders and other rare diseases for that matter, often are invisible and misunderstood. And people with functional disorders often go long time before their diagnosis, and they go through a system of provider after provider. They have people telling them that they're crazy or it's in their head, and this is just unnecessary suffering. And our team at Reactive is just really driven to get the word out about these disorders. So as I said, we have a course coming up next month. It's April 9th. And this article just came out. It's called Management of Functional Neurologic Disorder. It's a review and neurologic update. Great group of authors from Canada and the UK. It's open access, so it's free, full text. It was just published on the 19th of March. So I'm just going to say a very special thank you to these authors for just giving me something great to read at this time. So let's dive into it a little bit. Let's talk about functional neurologic disorders in general. At Reactive, we talk a lot about functional movement disorders because of our movement disorder fellowships, but the the broader term is actually a functional neurologic disorder. And actually, when we did our presentation at CSM, I used this umbrella to show functional neurologic disorder. And the functional movement disorder falls under that umbrella. And there's several things that we'll talk about today that fall under that umbrella. All of these disorders are the characteristic that is part of the umbrella is that they're due to a malfunction, a problem with function in the nervous system versus a focal lesion or damage. And that's the biggest distinction, I think, that's helpful from a definition standpoint. And it can present in many ways. And this is what I loved about this article, was very concise definitions and distinctions between the types of functional neurologic disorders. So I'm going to just go through some of them that they talked about. So first, functional motor symptoms, and this is often what we would call a functional movement disorder. And this would include things like weakness, functional weakness, gait disorders, tremor, dystonia, jerks, tics, all of those that are functional in nature. And the really nice thing, and I love that the review talks about this, is physical therapy, occupational therapy have a lot of evidence for these disorders and improving people's ability to move and return to a very full life. And this is what I certainly have seen in the people that we're able to work with. This is also very effective in a telemedicine realm, is to work with functional movement disorders. But we have very good evidence that this can be trained. And this is what we include in all of our courses, is how do you go about improving somebody's movement when they have a functional movement disorder or motor symptom. So that's the most common that we certainly see, are the functional motor symptoms. Something else that is common is a functional seizure. So this has been called several other things. Functional seizure is the kind of latest term for this. And the nice thing about a functional seizure is that it can actually be diagnosed with some testing. And so they'll actually do if I can get this word right, video electroencephalography. And there are distinct features that are seen in a functional seizure versus another seizure. So this then is also, there's some great evidence that it's very treatable, especially with some of the cognitive behavioral therapies. What can be tricky with all of these disorders is that they often overlap with a focal disorder. So you can get functional seizures on top of a more typical seizure due to a focal disorder. So that can be very tricky to piece apart. So we talked about functional motor symptoms, functional seizures. The authors also reviewed functional cognitive disorders. And this is actually something that I have seen and did not have a word for, to be honest. So I was very thankful for this review. And actually, Mike Studer talked about functional cognitive disorders in our neuroplasticity course as well. And I feel like my own knowledge of this is growing daily, to be honest. I've kind of dove down that rabbit hole of like, what is happening here? So a functional cognitive disorder includes disorders of memory-related symptoms that can get in the way of our day-to-day functioning, but they are inconsistent with actual neuropsychological testing. And I think we've all seen this before. I feel like I've had this before, memory symptoms that are related to depression or anxiety. I've certainly seen that before. Memory lapses that, I forget where my keys were, right? But if that becomes a really high, heightened sense of attention on that memory lapse, it can actually kind of start to rewire things and become a functional cognitive disorder. So I think these are really interesting and do take some really precise testing and working with a specialist, especially I would say a neurologist and a neuropsychologist, to tease these out, because you do want to rule out some less common medical disorders, right? So sleep apnea would be an example of something that could cause some of these pieces and is very treatable. So that's the case with all the functional disorders, is working with somebody who knows both sides of the things, that can really rule out the underlying medical and focal lesions and help identify a more functional problem. Okay, so that got us through some big three: motor symptoms, functional seizures, functional cognitive disorders. And then the next would be functional sensory symptoms. We've seen this as well. And this can be visual symptoms. It can be, what I've seen more is somatosensory symptoms, like a paresthesia or an anesthesia. Could also be hearing loss or tinnitus. And I have certainly, when I've seen these, they're usually with another disorder, with dystonia, a functional dystonia, with a functional motor or a functional movement disorder. So I have also seen, good news is, the sensory symptoms can respond very well in the same way that some of the motor symptoms or movement disorders can respond to training, especially with that taking things away from the self-directed attention, that abnormal self-directed attention, and attention outside of the body, using the optimal theory, which really would apply to any of these functional disorders. I learned so many new things in this article. One of them, which I had not heard of, was another type of functional disorder called Fowlers Syndrome, which is urinary retention and an impaired sensation of bladder fullness that can be triggered by a surgery, childbirth, or another minor medical procedure. I hadn't heard of that before. And although I will say now in retrospect, talking to patients that may have had some of these symptoms where a urologist was not able to get down to an underlying focal lesion again, I think they may have been better understood in a functional context. And I wish I had had that information then that I know now. Again, I'll put the link in because it's a free full text article. And I love it for its simplicity and its review. Okay, we're going to talk about a couple more here. 3PD, we're actually doing a course, one of our mini courses on this towards the end of the year. And you might have heard this, especially if you're in the vestibular world, but in 3PD actually fits in the world of functional disorders. This is where people might experience dizziness and unsteadiness, especially with moving or complex visual stimuli. And as many of you know, this responds very well to physical therapy. We've definitely seen this here at Re+active. I've seen some really great responses. And often, again, what I've seen in 3PD is that there was some sort of initial vestibular insult, whether that was BPPV or vestibular hypofunction or migraine or something like that, and then it progressed to a more functional disorder. But again, I think bottom line for all of this, physical therapy, occupational therapy, very effective for the functional disorders, especially in a multidisciplinary team. The next disorder that was included in the review were functional speech and voice disorders. And I actually have a client with this right now. And again, very, very helpful telehealth. You can really work alongside your speech therapist to help rehabilitate this disorder. And some of the things that you can see with this are speech arrest, hypophonia, dysphonia, stuttering, could all be part of a functional syndrome. And I think where it's possible to work alongside a speech therapist who's highly trained in the functional disorders as well, I think PT and speech can really go hand in hand. And then finally, I was so thankful the authors included this category in here, because I see this a lot, and I think a lot of people with functional disorders experience this: comorbid pain, fatigue, and cognitive fog. There is a high frequency of these things. Migraine has a high comorbidity with the functional disorders. And I think here is where, as therapists, we need to look through these and peel back some of the layers and address each of those pieces. And sometimes the intervention that you may be working with the person on addresses all of those together. And that's kind of the, the perfect package, if you will. So I was really thankful. I think sometimes those things kind of go off and they're like, oh yeah, that's like a part of everything. But I think it's really important to recognize that as part of a functional disorder and a connectivity issue once again. So again, really nice review of all of those different pieces of functional disorders. And they ended with this really lovely diagram that talks through an interdisciplinary treatment plan. And I just want to, they basically like have all these circles and bubbles that overlap. And they talk about addressing both the core symptom, so whether that's motor, cognitive, sensory, addressing fatigue, pain, cognitive fog, sleep. Sleep is huge here. This is why I love having our OT who specializes this. I love having him on our team. Addressing beliefs about those symptoms, addressing medication and the adverse effects, addressing any psychological factors if they're there, as well as social factors. So they have this whole really nice interdisciplinary treatment plan that I really love. We're just definitely going to include that as we are preparing our updated course here in April, is including that and how we address those things in some of the different cases that we are going to present, because it's a little bit different for everybody, as you can imagine. So that is a little review of a lovely article. Again, I will put a link in for it. I'll also put a link in for our course, because our course is coming up on April 9th. It'll be a live course, but we're also recording it. And we have a lot of updates to share from when we did this course last year, and even updates from when we did this at CSM just a few months ago, because the world of functional disorders is really growing. So would love to see you there in the course. And I want to share one other thing with you that I almost forgot. I shared this last week, but I've been loving using this, and now you can see it's starting to get wrinkled, because I can use this in my telehealth sessions now. But this is our River Runneth Over. I like to use it as an educational piece. But Chelsea developed this with Mike Studer when we put together our CSM course, and I've just been using it ever since. Mike went through it with our neuropracticity course, and what I really love about it is a really nice way to set up therapy for somebody with a functional disorder, to talk about their nervous system really as a riverbank that only goes so high, and the overflow of that riverbank leading to the functional neurologic disorder. So that could be movement, but it could be seizures. It could be the functional cognitive symptoms, and many different pieces that can contribute to that river. And here's us. We're little sandbags. Isn't that cute? We should have little happy faces on these sandbags. But basically, through our intervention, able to build up people's resources to prevent flooding. So I actually have this available to share with you as a download. So I'll post a link in there. You can download this, use it to help educate people about your role. I think it's great for functional disorders. I think it's great for migraine, headache, for persistent pain. Maybe for everything. So I love it. I'm using it a lot. So I just wanted to share it with you. I'll put a link in for you. And you know what? Thank you for joining me this Friday. I think it's just a huge high fives to all of you making it through another week that has really wreaked havoc on our healthcare system. And I know a lot of people watching are healthcare providers. So I thank you very, very much from the bottom of my heart. And I'm going to keep going on Fridays here. So I will see you next Friday. Thank you so much and have a really wonderful weekend.